when Gregory, my ever-calculating stepfather, announced over dinner that I would be marrying Claire, the cleaning girl from the hotel he owned. I almost choked on my wine. Claire, I repeated, staring at him like he'd suggested I marry a ghost. You're joking, right? Gregory's expression was stony, his gray eyes glinting with the kind of authority that made everyone at the table fall silent. Except me, of course. I don't joke about family matters, Elijah. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Claire sat across from me, wide-eyed and clutching her napkin as though it might shield her from the absurdity of the situation. She looked as out of place at our mansion's dining table as I felt in this conversation. This is ridiculous, I snapped, slamming my fork down. You can't just order me to marry someone. I can when it's about responsibility, Gregory said smoothly. You've had enough time squandering the family name on yachts and socialites. It's time you grew up. And Claire here, he gestured at her like a prized artifact, is the perfect person to help you do that. I glanced at Claire, hoping for some sign of defiance, but her eyes were fixed on the tablecloth. Perfect, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She scrubs floors for a living. Gregory's lip curled in that signature way that told me he was done tolerating my insolence. Yes, she scrubs floors. She works hard. Something you've never done in your life. I shot up from my chair. This is insane. You can't dictate my life like this. I can, Gregory said, his voice cool and firm. And I will. The wedding date is set. Elijah, either you marry her, or you'll find yourself cut off from every penny your mother left you. The room spun for a moment. My inheritance, the money that represented the last piece of my mother, was on the line. Later that evening, I found Claire sitting alone in the garden. The moonlight highlighted her worried expression, and for the first time, I saw something other than shock in her eyes. Quiet determination. This is absurd, you know, I said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. She didn't look at me. You think I wanted this? I blinked, taken aback by her sharp tone. I had no idea this was coming, she continued. Mr. Harrington, your stepfather, said he needed to discuss an important opportunity. I thought it was about my job, not this circus. Her candor caught me off guard. I had expected her to be meek, maybe even complicit in Gregory's scheme. But the Claire in front of me was anything but. You could have said no, I pointed out. She laughed bitterly. Right? And risk losing the only stable job I've ever had? It's not like people line up to hire someone with no education and a resume full of cleaning gigs. Her words stung, though I couldn't say why. For a moment, we sat in silence, both prisoners of Gregory's machinations. So, what's your plan? She asked, finally turning to me. Plan? To get us out of this mess, she said, arching an eyebrow. You're the billionaire heir. Surely you've thought of something. I hesitated. I hadn't, mostly because I'd spent the evening nursing my wounded pride and fury at Gregory. She sighed. Typical. As the weeks passed, Claire and I developed an uneasy alliance. Gregory was relentless, parading us around as the perfect couple to his business associates and the press. Every dinner party, every staged photo op, chipped away at my patience. But Claire endured it with surprising resilience. One night, after yet another formal dinner at Gregory's insistence, Claire cornered me in the study. I found something, she said, her voice low. Something like what? She handed me a folded letter. The paper looked old, its edges frayed. I opened it carefully and scanned the contents. It was a will. A draft of my mother's will, to be exact. And it mentioned Claire's name. My stomach tightened. What is this? Claire crossed her arms. You tell me. Why would your mother leave something for a cleaning girl she never met? I stared at the letter, my mind racing. My mother's signature was unmistakable, but the implications were staggering. Had she known Claire? Or was this another one of Gregory's manipulations? Something doesn't add up, Claire said, her tone sharp. I think your stepfather is hiding more than we realize. For For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her not as a burden but as a potential ally. Then let's find out what he's hiding, I said. As the wedding day approached, the cracks in Gregory's plan began to widen. Claire and I discovered more inconsistencies. Suspicious financial transactions, old photographs of my mother with a young girl who looked eerily like Claire, and coded entries in Gregory's ledgers. Each clue painted a picture more twisted than the last, and it became clear that this marriage was only a small piece of a much larger game. By the eve of the wedding, Claire and I were no longer adversaries. We were partners, bound by a mutual desire to uncover the truth. But nothing could prepare us for what would happen the next day. I never thought I'd see the day when Claire and I would be sneaking around Gregory's mansion like two characters in a B-grade spy thriller. But there we were. The discovery of the old will with her name had thrown everything into disarray. Gregory was clearly orchestrating more than just a humiliating marriage. Claire had spent years cleaning the very estate we were now investigating, and her knowledge of its hidden corners was our greatest advantage. Late at night, we combed through the house, searching for anything that could shed light on her connection to my mother. "What are we even looking for?" I whispered, following Claire into the attic. "Proof," she replied, tugging on the chain of a dim bulb overhead. "Anything that proves Gregory's hiding something." The attic was a cavernous space filled with dusty trunks, forgotten antiques, and towering shelves. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Claire immediately set to work, opening boxes with practiced efficiency. "Did my mother know you?" I asked, watching her sift through old photographs. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not that I'm aware of. But—" She paused, holding up a faded photo. "Look at this." I took the picture from her. It was of my mother in her 20s. Holding hands with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. The child had Claire's dark hair and sharp eyes. "This can't be," I muttered, staring at the image. Claire's face was unreadable. "It's me, Elijah. I don't know how or why, but that's me." We both fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on us. If this was true, Claire wasn't just a random pawn in Gregory's scheme. She was someone my mother had known intimately. Over the next few days, we unraveled a web of connections that sent shivers down my spine. Hidden among Gregory's private files were letters exchanged between him and a woman named Annette, my mother's best friend from her early years. Annette had been Claire's mother. Claire sat across from me in the library as we pieced together the timeline. "So, my mother worked for your family before I was born," she said, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "She must have brought me here as a child. And my mother must have cared for both of you," I added. "But why didn't she mention you in her later years? And why would Gregory keep all this hidden?" Claire frowned. "Maybe he didn't want you to know. It's easier to manipulate people when they're in the dark." The implications were staggering. If Claire's mother had been close to mine, then Claire wasn't just some cleaning girl. She was practically family. And Gregory had buried that connection to suit his twisted agenda. As we dug deeper, Gregory's motives became even murkier. A secret account linked to Claire's mother had been emptied just weeks before her death in a car accident. Claire's father had left when she was a baby, and her mother had struggled to make ends meet. The sudden disappearance of the money reeked of foul play. "This can't be a coincidence," Claire said, her voice trembling. I nodded grimly. "It isn't. Gregory must have taken the money. But why? And what does it have to do with this marriage?" The wedding preparations continued as if nothing was amiss. Gregory, oblivious to our investigation, reveled in the spectacle he was creating. The guest list had ballooned to include everyone from local politicians to business magnates, all eager to witness the union of a billionaire heir and a humble cleaning girl. Claire played her part flawlessly, smiling through dress fittings and cake tastings, while I worked behind the scenes to find the missing pieces of Gregory's puzzle. The night before the wedding, I confronted Gregory in his study. "Why her?" I demanded, slamming the photo of my mother and Claire onto his desk. Gregory barely glanced at it, You're overthinking this, Elijah. Claire is a decent girl who will keep you grounded. That's all there is to it. Bullshit, I snapped. You've been pulling strings from the beginning. What are you hiding? He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. Careful, son. You wouldn't want to upset your bride on the eve of your big day. The dismissal in his tone only fueled my anger. This isn't over, I said, storming out. Claire and I spent the rest of the night preparing for the worst. We knew Gregory wouldn't give up his secrets easily, but we couldn't let the wedding proceed without uncovering the truth. What if we just run? Claire suggested, half joking. I shook my head. He'd track us down. Besides, I'm not letting him win. Her smile was faint but genuine. You're stubborn, Harrington. I'll give you that. The wedding day dawned with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Claire looked stunning in her gown, though her expression betrayed her unease. I could feel the weight of Gregory's gaze as I stood at the altar, waiting for her to walk down the aisle. But just as the ceremony began, the doors burst open. A woman I didn't recognize stormed in, clutching a stack of papers. She was older, her face weathered but fierce. "Stop this wedding!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the grand hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory shot to his feet, his face pale. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping forward. The woman locked eyes with Claire. "I'm your aunt," she said, "and I have proof that this marriage is built on lies." Claire's hands shook as she took the papers from the woman. I peered over her shoulder, my heart racing as I read the words. A detailed account of financial transactions, handwritten letters implicating Gregory in the embezzlement of Claire's mother's money, and a legal document tying Claire to a trust fund my mother had set up for her. "This can't be real," I murmured. Claire's aunt turned to me. "It's real. Gregory has been stealing from both of you for years, and he's using this marriage to cover his tracks." Gregory's face twisted in rage. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the room was already in chaos. Guests whispered furiously, cameras flashed, and Claire's expression hardened into one of resolve. For the first time, I felt like we had the upper hand. "Call the wedding off," I said, my voice firm. "We're not playing your game anymore, Gregory." The look on his face was worth every second of this nightmare. But I knew this was just the beginning. The truth was out, but the battle had only just begun. The wedding was in shambles, the carefully arranged decor serving as a backdrop for chaos. Gregory's typically calm demeanor had evaporated, replaced by frantic attempts to regain control. "Everyone out," he bellowed, his voice cracking as he gestured wildly at the guests. "This is a private matter." But no one budged. Socialites, journalists, and local dignitaries whispered behind their hands, their eyes gleaming with the promise of a scandal. Claire stood frozen, her grip on the incriminating papers tightening with each passing second. Her aunt, a woman she had never met until that moment, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Don't let him intimidate you, Claire," she said firmly. "The truth is finally out. He can't hurt you anymore." Gregory snarled, his face contorted in fury. "You don't know what you're talking about, Annette." Annette. The name sent a shock through me. Claire's aunt was my mother's best friend, the same woman mentioned in the letters we had found. She turned to me, her gaze steady. "Elijah, your mother set up a trust for Claire and her mother years ago," she explained. "But Gregory intercepted it. He drained the funds and left Claire's family destitute. Your marriage was his way of ensuring neither of you would ever find out." The weight of her words sank in. Gregory had orchestrated everything. Claire's poverty, my humiliation, the entire wedding, to keep his crimes buried. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Gregory sneered. "Oh, come on, Elijah. Don't be naive. You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. What's a little manipulation to protect what's mine? What's yours?" I repeated, incredulous. "That money was my mother's. She trusted you." Gregory shrugged, his smugness making my blood boil. Your mother was sentimental. I was practical. I made sure her charity didn't go to waste. The room fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Then, Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. You destroyed my mother's life, she said, her eyes blazing. You left us with nothing, and now you want to use me like a pawn. You're a monster. For the first time, Gregory faltered. The righteous fury in Claire's voice seemed to shake even his ironclad confidence. In the aftermath of the wedding's collapse, the guests finally began to disperse, their whispers carrying the promise of headlines that would haunt Gregory for years. Claire, her aunt, and I retreated to a quiet corner of the estate. Annette handed over a thick file filled with evidence, bank statements, legal documents, and letters that painted a damning picture of Gregory's actions. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked Annette, my frustration evident. She sighed, her face lined with regret. I didn't know the extent of it until recently. Gregory was careful, always staying just out of reach. But when I saw the wedding announcement, I realized he was pulling strings again. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Claire looked at me, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. We have to take this to the authorities, she said. I nodded. Agreed. But first, we need to protect you. The next few days were a whirlwind. Claire and I worked with a lawyer recommended by Annette to prepare our case against Gregory. Meanwhile, I took steps to freeze his access to the family accounts, using my position as co-executor of my mother's estate. Gregory, of course, didn't take this lying down. He stormed into my office one afternoon, his face a mask of fury. You think you can turn my life upside down and get away with it? He hissed. I think I can make sure justice is served, I replied coldly. You've had your fun, Gregory. It's over. He slammed his fist on the desk. You ungrateful brat. Everything you have is because of me. Everything I have is because of my mother. I shot back. You're just a parasite who latched onto her for your own gain. For a moment, Gregory seemed ready to strike me, but he held back, his expression twisting into a sneer. You'll regret this, Elijah. Mark my words. Despite Gregory's threats, Claire and I pressed forward. We submitted the evidence to the authorities, triggering an investigation that sent shockwaves through the business community. Gregory's name was splashed across headlines, his reputation in tatters. But even as we gained ground, the fight wasn't over. Gregory's lawyers tried every trick in the book to discredit Claire and Annette, painting them as opportunists trying to extort money from a grieving widower. They're playing dirty, Claire said one evening, her frustration evident. We'll beat them, I assured her. The truth is on our side. The turning point came when a former associate of Gregory's came forward, corroborating our claims. This man, a disgraced accountant, provided a detailed account of how Gregory had funneled money from the trust into offshore accounts. It's enough to bury him, our lawyer said, his tone confident. And he was right. Within weeks, Gregory was facing charges of embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. The man who had once lorded over us with smug arrogance was now a pariah, his empire crumbling around him. As the dust began to settle, Claire and I found ourselves standing in the garden where we had first hatched our plan to uncover the truth. The air was crisp, the scent of blooming flowers a reminder of new beginnings. We did it, she said softly, a hint of disbelief in her voice. I looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had endured so much but the ally who had fought alongside me. We did, I agreed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not dictated by Gregory's schemes or the weight of my family's legacy. And as Claire smiled, I realized that future might be brighter than I had ever expected. The legal battles against Gregory unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. Within weeks of the evidence going public, the embezzlement charges began stacking up. Gregory's once mighty presence was reduced to that of a desperate man clawing to keep his secrets buried. But for Claire and me, the fallout was more personal. Claire's world had shifted dramatically. For the first time in her life, she wasn't cleaning floors to make ends meet. She had access to the trust fund my mother had intended for her family. Money that could change her life forever. But money couldn't erase the emotional toll. Every time I look at it, she confessed one night, holding a bank statement with her newfound wealth, I think about what my mom went through, how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed, all while Gregory was stealing from us. I reached for her hand. None of this is your fault, Claire. Gregory's the one who has to answer for what he's done. You've earned this, and your mother would want you to have it. She smiled faintly, but I could tell the scars of her past were still fresh. Meanwhile, Gregory's threats hadn't disappeared. Though his lawyers were losing ground, he still managed to keep his influence alive in smaller, insidious ways. One afternoon, as Claire and I left a meeting with our legal team, we found a manila envelope taped to the windshield of my car. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me as a child, sitting on my mother's lap. Next to her was Gregory, his arm draped over her shoulder like he belonged there. But scrawled across the photo in red ink were the words, "You think you know the truth. You don't." Claire's hand shook as she held the photograph. What is this supposed to mean? I clenched my jaw, rage boiling inside me. It's Gregory trying to rattle us. He knows he's losing, but deep down, I couldn't shake the unease that crept into my mind. Gregory had always been calculating, always a step ahead. What if there was more to the story than we'd uncovered? We didn't have to wait long for the next twist. A week later, a man named Richard, a former employee of Gregory's, reached out to Annette. He claimed to have information that would blow the case wide open. We met him in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Richard was wiry and nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds as if Gregory might materialize behind him. What I'm about to tell you, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, is going to change everything you thought you knew about your mother. I stiffened. What are you talking about? Richard hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of documents, birth certificates, letters, and financial records. As I scanned the papers, the blood drained from my face. My mother had been married once before she met my father. And Claire wasn't just some girl her family had helped. She was my half-sister. The room spun as the revelation sank in. I pushed the folder away, my hands trembling. This can't be true. Claire grabbed the papers, her eyes scanning the details. It has to be a mistake. There's no way. Richard shook his head. It's no mistake. Your mother and Annette's brother had a child before she met your father. But the marriage fell apart, and your mother left to start over. Gregory found out years later and used it to his advantage. Annette, who had been silent until now, looked at Claire with tears in her eyes. You're my brother's daughter. That's why my sister-in-law kept you close. She wanted to honor the connection, even after everything fell apart. Claire turned to me, her face pale. What does this mean for us? For everything we've been through? I didn't have an answer. The weight of the revelation crushed me, turning every shared moment, every late-night conversation, into a question mark. The fallout was immediate. Claire and I barely spoke for days, each of us grappling with the implications. Though we hadn't crossed any lines, the knowledge of our familial bond made every interaction feel fraught. Gregory, of course, wasted no time capitalizing on the revelation. Family reunions must be awkward these days, he taunted when we faced him in court. But hey, at least you can share the inheritance now. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to wipe the smug grin off his face. Claire, however, held her head high. You don't get to control us anymore, she said, her voice steady. Whatever happens now, you're finished. And that's all that matters. Despite the revelation, Claire and I remained united in our fight against Gregory. The trial dragged on, each day bringing new revelations about his financial misdeeds and personal betrayals. In the end, Gregory's empire crumbled under the weight of the evidence. He was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and forgery, and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of justice. But the personal aftermath was far more complicated. Claire decided to leave town shortly after the trial concluded. "This isn't goodbye," she said as we stood on the mansion steps, the morning sun casting a golden glow over her face. "But I need time to figure out who I am, who we are, outside of all this chaos." I nodded, though the thought of her absence left an ache in my chest. "Take all the time you need," I said. "You deserve a fresh start." As she walked away, suitcase in hand, I realized that despite everything we'd been through, some wounds would take longer to heal than others. Months passed after the trial, and life moved forward in a strange, uneasy rhythm. Gregory's downfall made headlines for weeks, his empire dismantled piece by piece. The Harrington name, once synonymous with prestige, had become a cautionary tale of greed and corruption. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, I found myself consumed by the loose ends Gregory left behind / 2014 and the unshakable absence of Claire. She had settled in a small coastal town, far from the chaos of the city. Every now and then, I received a short message from her / 2014, a photo of the waves, a brief update on her job at a local art gallery. But the messages were impersonal, a stark contrast to the connection we had forged during our battle against Gregory. It wasn't just the distance that gnawed at me. It was the unanswered questions. The truth about her parentage, about her bond with my mother, still lingered like a shadow in my mind. Couldn't let it rest. One day, as I sorted through the remnants of Gregory's files / 2014, the ones the investigators had deemed irrelevant / 2014, I stumbled upon an envelope marked with my mother's handwriting. It was addressed to Claire's mother, Annette's sister-in-law. Inside was a letter written shortly before my mother's death. "Dear Marie, I've made a decision, one I hope you'll forgive me for. Elijah will inherit everything after I'm gone, and I've left something for Claire, too. But Gregory knows too much. He's tried to convince me that keeping our shared history buried is best for everyone. But I don't trust him. If anything happens to me, please don't let him manipulate Claire the way he's tried to manipulate Elijah. You're her protector now, Marie. I trust you with her future. Love always, Catherine." The words sent a chill through me. My mother had known Gregory's intentions and had tried to shield us from them, even in her final days. She had foreseen his schemes, yet she hadn't been able to stop them. The letter felt like a directive. I needed to find Claire, not just to share this piece of our history, but to truly understand what it meant for both of us. I arrived at the seaside town late in the afternoon, the salty breeze cutting through the warmth of the sun. Claire's art gallery was a quaint, two-story building with large windows that framed the crashing waves. I hesitated before stepping inside, unsure of what I expected to find. She was there, arranging a display of painted seashells. Her hair was loose, falling in waves over her shoulders, and she wore a simple dress that moved with the breeze from the open door. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted from surprise to something softer. "Elijah," she said, setting down a shell. "What are you doing here?" I held up the envelope. "I found something you need to see." We sat on a bench overlooking the water as she read the letter. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting golden light over the waves. When she finished, she stared at the paper for a long time, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She knew," Claire said finally, her voice trembling. "She knew Gregory was trying to ruin us." "She did," I said, "and she trusted your mother to protect you. But Gregory got to her first." Claire folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the edges. "My mother did everything she could. She always told me to be careful, to never trust people who seemed too eager to help. I thought it was just her bitterness about the past, but now, she was right." I finished. Claire turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Why did you come here, Elijah? Was it just to give me this?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, I came because I can't move forward without you. I thought I could, but everything feels empty." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not that simple. We're still untangling everything Gregory left behind. Our connection, our bond, has been so complicated. I know, I said quietly, but I don't care about the complications. Care about you, about us, and I think my mother did too. In the days that followed, Claire and I spent hours talking, walking along the shoreline as we pieced together the fragments of our lives. The revelations about our families hadn't erased our bond. If anything, they had deepened it, giving us a shared history that no one else could understand. Claire decided to use her trust fund to create something meaningful /U 2014A Foundation in her mother's name, aimed at supporting single parents and working-class families. It's what my mom would have wanted, she said. I offered to help, leveraging the connections I still had to bring her vision to life. Together, we built something neither of us could have imagined when Gregory first forced us into his twisted scheme. Years later, as I stood in front of a crowd at the grand opening of the Foundation's new headquarters, I looked at Claire, who stood beside me. She had become more than the girl forced into an impossible situation. She was a leader, a visionary, and the person who had helped me find my own path. When I spoke, I didn't just talk about the Foundation's mission. I talked about my mother, her unwavering belief in doing the right thing, and the strength it took to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. And when the ceremony was over, as Claire and I walked through the garden together, I took her hand. We did it, I said. She smiled, her eyes bright with tears. We did. In that moment, I knew that no matter where life took us, we had found something worth fighting for /U 2014 together. Life after the Foundation's grand opening felt like stepping into sunlight after years of storm clouds. Claire and I were finally building something meaningful together. Yet, as fulfilling as the present was, shadows of the past continued to loom. Gregory, though disgraced and imprisoned, still had connections, and every so often, reminders of his reach would resurface like ghosts refusing to be laid to rest. A suspiciously delayed permit for the Foundation's headquarters, cryptic messages left on voicemail, and whispers of offshore accounts that might still be active. It all hinted that Gregory wasn't done with us. He's in jail, Claire said one evening as we sat in the living room of her modest seaside home. What more could he possibly do? I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, staring at the fire crackling in the hearth. People like Gregory don't stop, even when they're behind bars. He's probably orchestrating something through his cronies. Claire sighed, leaning back against the sofa. Then we'll face it, like we always do. Her calm determination was something I admired deeply, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next twist came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Claire and I were at the Foundation's office when Annette called, her voice sharp and urgent. Turn on the news. Now. I scrambled for the remote and switched on the TV. The headlines scrawling across the bottom of the screen made my blood run cold. Disgraced businessman Gregory Harrington escapes custody during prison transfer. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. How is this even possible? The report detailed how Gregory, during a routine transfer to a different facility, had managed to escape with the help of an unknown accomplice. The authorities were conducting a manhunt, but so far, he had vanished without a trace. He's coming for us, I said, the realization sinking in like a lead weight. Claire nodded, her face pale but resolute. Then we need to be ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind of precautions. We hired private security for the Foundation and increased surveillance at Claire's home. I moved in temporarily, unwilling to leave her alone while Gregory was at large. But Gregory's retaliation came not in the form of a direct attack, but through a far more insidious method. It started with whispers in the media, anonymous tips accusing the Foundation of embezzling funds. Reporters dug into Claire's past, dredging up her time as a cleaning girl and questioning her qualifications to run a multimillion-dollar charity. They're trying to discredit us, Claire said, throwing a newspaper onto the table. This has Gregory written all over it. I clenched my jaw. We'll fight back. We've done it before and we'll do it again. The turning point came when a man claiming to represent Gregory contacted us directly. He showed up unannounced at the foundation's office, his demeanor smug and self-assured. "Gregory has a proposal," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was a document outlining a settlement. Gregory was willing to withdraw his influence and cease all attacks on the foundation if we paid him a hefty sum from Claire's trust fund. Claire's laugh was bitter as she slammed the folder shut. "He wants me to buy my freedom? After everything he's done?" The man shrugged. "He's willing to be reasonable, but the choice is yours. Refuse and things might get messy." I stood, my voice cold and firm. "Tell Gregory we're not afraid of him.